Hello and welcome to FinTech Talk. I'm your host, Charles Orton-Jones. Today we're looking at the consumer experience of fraud. When a person is stung by a fraud, debit or credit card, it's a traumatic moment. It's more than just a financial hit. It takes an emotional toll as well. It's a moment when the consumer reevaluates their relationship with the organization that issued the card. Do they want to carry on working with this bank, or are they going to sever relations? It is a moment that is not terribly well researched, but fortunately, two of the world's leading organizations in the banking world have come together and produced just a fabulous deep dive into the customer experience of fraud, what it's like to experience it, and what customers really value. Quick resolution, good communication, and fast decision making. So, to talk us through the findings of this wonderful report, we have two of the masterminds. So, may I welcome Ron Shevlin. Ron is Chief Research Officer at Cornerstone Advisors. Cornerstone is a consultancy that helps banks, credit unions, and fintechs. Ron, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Charles.
And also joining us today is Ryan Sorrells. Ryan is Chief Revenue Officer at Quavo. Quavo is a world-leading provider of automated dispute management solutions for banks and financial organizations. Ryan, hi.
Good to see you, Charles.
Ron, perhaps you could just tee us up. The report is called The Fraud Experience, a Key Banking Relationship Differentiator. Why look at this particular area?
Charles, I can't imagine there's anybody listening in here or anywhere in the financial industry that needs to be told that fraud levels are through the roof and just continuing to increase year over year across the industry in all different areas, and particularly in payments fraud. But I kind of felt that there was an overlooked opportunity here to see what consumers' fraud resolution, fraud dispute experience was. This isn't about trying to prove that fraud levels. It was really trying to look at what experience do consumers have with their issuers when they do experience either credit card or debit card related fraud. And then very importantly, how good is that experience? But very importantly, what impact is it having on their relationships? And as you can imagine, that for consumers who did not experience a very good process, and this is not just about whether or not the fraud was resolved. It was throughout the process. How was the level of communication? What was the speed of the process? For consumers who had negative experiences, they are much less likely to do more business with that card issuer. But very importantly, for those consumers that did have good experiences, they are much more likely to continue to use and actually increase the usage of those cards that were impacted by the fraud.
And yeah, Ryan, why did Quavo get involved in this report? And really, what's the reward for organizations that understand these dynamics?
Sure. I think one of the reasons we got involved in the report was there really, up to this point, hasn't been an objective way to really measure that experience that Ron talked about. So, certainly as you evaluate kind of the overall fraud dispute resolution process, there are metrics that have historically been used, but the experience of the cardholder is really paramount. And up to this point, there wasn't a good objective way to measure that. So one of the things that I think is great about the work that Ron and the Cornerstone Advisors team did was it really provided a very strong framework on how to benchmark and how to compare your experience to perhaps other institutions. And then, sort of the why does that matter? As Ron said, the research shows that there's a very strong correlation between how that experience transpires and the future relationship with that particular account holder. So I think instinctively or sort of intellectually, we've probably all known that experience was very important, but the research really gives a strong way to quantify it and then, some meaningful results off of it.
Yeah, this is a report that names names. It provides benchmarks for all the major card providers, and you can see who performs well, who underperforms, who's bottom of the pile. Sometimes on FinTech Talk we say a tier one bank. No, this report actually gives you the hard data on performance, which is why I'm urging anyone to watch this to download it and read it. But let's talk about the findings. Ron, let's talk about maybe what's going wrong.
Well, I'm going to start, Charles, with what's going right, actually. because we looked at the various aspects of the fraud dispute or fraud resolution process, starting with the identification of the fraud and whether that came from the issuer or from the cardholder, him or herself. Then it goes through a process of providing provisional credit, then through investigation, decision, and then underlying that, of course, across all aspects of it is a communication aspect to it. Consumers, and we surveyed over 2,000 cardholders who have experienced fraud in the last 3 to 4 years. So these are folks that have been through the experience, and for many of them, more than once over the past few years as well. So they've been through this a couple of times. And for the most part, the cardholders are pretty show high levels of satisfaction with the detection aspect of the whether the fraud was detected by themselves and they reported it, or whether the fraud was detected by their cardholders and they were notified with it. They were pretty satisfied with that. At the other end of the spectrum was the decision and resolution, and with, of course, with so many protections, depending on where you are geographically. Here in the U.S., where I am, we've got a lot of protections. So for the most part, consumers are satisfied with the decision and resolution. But there's a bit of a trough from a satisfaction level with the issuing of provisional credit, and in particular with the whole investigation and data collection process. And I think what consumers are reflecting here, Charles, is the reality that to a certain extent, there's kind of this black box that happens after the fraud is detected and they're notified of it, or if they then are the ones who detect it and notify their cardholder. They may or may not get provisional credit issued, but then it goes through this black box where they don't know what's happening. How long is this going to take? Where are you? What kind of information do you need? The questions that come back kind of dribble in. Many issuers, card issuers, do not have a portal where consumers can go in and see and see where they are in the process. And so it's in the provisional credit and the investigation data collection phases that most issuers tend to fall down on.
I think that's really valuable. So we're already zeroing in on where organizations can improve. Ryan, what were your sort of headline takeaways from this report?
Yeah, I think as Ron just mentioned, the areas of satisfaction and then the areas of dissatisfaction were, I think they were meaningful. The areas of dissatisfaction probably aligned to, what we would think going in, which is, the provisional credit and kind of that being a key moment. If you think about that from sort of both perspectives, for the account holder and the card holder, that's the period of greatest anxiety. Fraud has occurred, or I've got, a dispute where I'm uncertain about my money, and the longer that takes to be provided is the time that my anxiety increases. If I'm in a debit account, I'm wondering, access to my funds. If I'm on a credit account, I'm gaining interest. So that's the period of greatest anxiety for the cardholder. But for the issuer, that's also the period where we need to be the most accurate. If issuing provisional credit to someone that shouldn't have it, maybe it's a first-party fraud instance, or there's the dispute really should be denied. That puts the financial institution at risk of greater loss. So that's really a kind of key moment where both sides need to be accurate, and I think highlighting that impact of the impact that has on the overall experience was pretty meaningful out of the data for sure.
But it seemed, Ryan,
Charles,
that
before you
go on,
jump
go
in
ahead.
there, I just wanted to add on to something here, and add on to Ryan's comments too, is that I don't want to get too deep into sort of the methodology of the research, but I do think it's important that folks understand how we came up with this. We did identify the five aspects of the overall process, but within each of them, we didn't just simply ask, were you satisfied, yes or no? We identified attributes of each of the elements of the process and then asked, was this, how satisfied were you with this aspect of it? Or did your issuer provide you with this? Did they provide you with that? So we've got a pretty good, I think, framework for financial institutions to use to measure their own process and to put it up against to see how it was done. So that this was not simply a high level, were you satisfied, yes or no? We identified very specific attributes and asked the cardholders to grade their issuers on the process for each of these elements.
Yeah, I particularly like, yeah, this is absolutely right. It is a nuanced report and it asks For example, speed of response even breaks it down into very fast. How would you rate the speed of the issuer's response after the fraud was reported? 59% said very fast, 29% said fast 1 to 2 days, 9% acceptable 3 to 5 days, and actually only 3% found it unacceptable more than 5 days. So yeah, this report really does give a breakdown of the nuance behind all of these steps involved in fraud reporting, processing, keeping people informed, and final resolution. Ron, is it too early to talk about some of the best performing organizations?
No, not at all.
Fine.
Yeah, I
Well,
think.
let's name names because that's a fun part. And again, I love the fact this report actually provides a table ranking all the major card issuers. And we've all had our gut instincts, anecdotally, over who are the good performers. But here we actually have, the fraud experience index telling us who's the best and who gets the wooden spoon. So yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of what the Cornerstone Advisor research shows, top performing overall, American Express, and then what you see kind of following behind that are, largely at the top of the list, large organizations, maybe perhaps larger budgets, more investment in this area. But I think what's really useful about the benchmarking and the framework is it also provides, a place where community banks and credit unions can, sort of identify where on the whole those are falling, which you see a little bit below the larger organizations. But as Ron mentioned, what I think is really powerful about the framework is that it can be utilized by any organization to really benchmark themselves. And I think as Ron mentioned, it's not just a high level single question, was this good or was this bad, but there's multiple steps. And I think it provides an opportunity for an individual issuer or financial institution to peg themselves, follow a similar framework, follow a process, and see overall how do we stack up with, this report shows the top of the top is American Express. How do we stack up? And where are we getting A's and where are we getting B's and C's? And then that really helps dial in on where there's opportunity for improvement.
Definitely. I think also, Mariah, we don't want to be cruel here because I think everyone performs okay. I mean, Citibank are bottom of the pile, just Chime not doing too well either. But the scores are not terrible for any one particular organization. But you're right, American Express do come top of the fraud experience index. And I can see the index ranks organizations with the percentage of customers in A, B, C, D, or F, the bottom category. And American Express has 3 times as many in the top category compared to bottom ranked Citibank. But Ryan, overall, there's a broad level of satisfaction, isn't it? It's not an industry in crisis exactly, is it?
No, and I think that's important, right? I mean, this is an area that there is investment taking place in. This is an area where, as I said, sort of intellectually, we all know that this is important. So I think that's reflected here. You're right. It's not an area in crisis. The D's and F's, as the rankings lay out, are not high numbers. But what it also shows is the powerful difference between an A and a C. And I think when you look at the average overall, top performer American Express is coming in right at a B. The rest of the organizations are falling in that C range as a whole, and the average across the base. As you mentioned, it sort of breaks down what are A's and what are B's. But I think what's also very interesting is when you say, now, what's the difference between an A and a C? How is that impact? The data backs up further utilization of the card, engagement for additional products and services. There's a dramatic difference between an A and a C, and so there really is a powerful, driver here to try to move up that ladder towards more A experiences.
Very much so.
Yeah, I want to emphasize
Yeah,
on that, Charles, if I can,
sure.
because yeah, the scores don't seem to vary, but again, those are averages. I think it's very, and the reason we put the distribution in there, because primarily wanted community banks to see that a third of their cardholders who experienced fraud with the fraud dispute with them rated the process either D or F. So yeah, the average turned out to be okay in the scheme of things. But that's a third of the experiences versus American Express, where only 10% of the experiences or consumers, cardholders had experience rated at a D or an F. So that's one aspect of it. But I think what to emphasize what Ryan is saying is I think it's important, and this is in the research itself, in the report, that the impact on a cardholder's number one, intention to do more business with that cardholder, and number two, continue to use the card as frequently as they did, is hugely impacted by whether or not it's an A, a B, a C, a D, or an F.
Mm.
And so, yeah, the average scores aren't too different, but that's why the distribution is there. Because again, 17% of the American Express card holders rated it an A, 37% a B. That's over half. Where with like Chime, for example, or better yet, Citibank, where their A's and B's were only 36%. So they need to be doing a lot better job on the fraud dispute resolution process if they want to be expanding their relationship and in keeping up on the card usage of their cardholders.
Very much so. I love the table on page 13, if anyone's looking at the report I have in front of me, which is how behavior changes according to the experience. And intuitively, it's exactly what you'd expect. If people have had a good experience, they're classing themselves A. Yeah, the numbers stack up. If someone has had an A class experience after having a fraud, their response is 39% says, yeah, I'll use my card more frequently. And the worst experience is if you're an F, yeah, people are closing that account. It's kind of what we expect is. But so Ryan, there are some big rewards on offer here.
Yeah, for sure. I think another one, that the research shows us is 80% of consumers that had an A experience improve the likelihood that they're going to use additional products or services from that organization. Contrast that with a C. We get an average experience, it's half that number. It's 39%. So there is large rewards by moving, but just between that C and the A. I think this research is, as Charles, as you and Ron both pointed out, show there is risk, in a D and an F sort of performance. That's consistent with other research that we've done as well. We have another trust and banking research that talks about there's, upwards of 2/3 of people are willing to change financial institutions based on a negative experience here. So I think it was really powerful that the Cornerstone Advisors research, collected a really good framework, but then also, sort of validated against other things we've seen.
It's so useful. We've actually got the numbers. Intuition is one thing, but having the benchmark data, so valuable. But Ryan, let's just talk about, therefore, how companies can respond to this. I mean, what does the report tell us about the weak spots in the fraud process? Because some things the report says a lot of organizations are doing pretty well, speed of response. Where are the weak points and where should organizations be focusing?
Yeah, I agree. I want to echo. I think a lot of what the research shows is that overall parts of it are going very well. The weak parts, as we talked about early on, it's in the timing of provisional credit, how fast and how quickly issuers are able to respond and issue that first credit and start to ease the anxiety. Oftentimes, from a cardholder's perspective, that moment is when the issue is, quote, done, even though the issuer is continuing on with a pretty substantial investigation. So the timing of that initial credit, and then the overall investigation and document collection, those are the two weakest areas. Where there's an opportunity that we see is really in automation. This is where technology can be the tool or can be the friend to really move this forward. The outcome that we want is faster provisional credit, but we want to be accurate. The outcome that we want is easier investigation, easier document exchange, better communication. How we get there is through greater automation and through the use of technology. A lot of what we see as the opportunity is, by automating, you're really freeing people's time to do the higher touch, more important things. So, automation is not about removing people from the equation. It's in fact more, let's automate the simpler tasks, the more repeatable things, and really free up time to spend on the more complex. So that could mean automation of a dispute end to end. If this is a clear cut case, we know very intuitively, we know from the data what the resolution should be, automate that and move on. But even in the cases where we need deeper investigation and where, really the people and team need to get involved in that investigation, automate as much of that process as possible. And what we see is upwards of 90% of the tasks within any given dispute can be automated. And that's really a great way to now address those kind of underlying issues of how do we get faster provisional credit? How do we get better communication?
It must be. Ron, same question to you. With this report, there's actually a lot of numbers in there. There's plenty of pages to turn. What lessons are you drawing from this report? You advise banks and fintechs and financial organizations when you go and see them next. Where are you going to be directing them to in this report?
There's a couple of things, and it's not even the numbers necessarily. I think there's two things to really come away from for a lot of financial institutions and fintechs. I think they focus a lot of their efforts on outbound marketing and putting the deal together, the product, without understanding that once they've got that card in somebody's hands, all that stuff doesn't matter anymore. And now it's more about the experience. And so you're really kind of focusing on the fraud resolution. It's kind of a paradox in some ways, in that with the increasing levels of fraud, and in particular payment fraud, it's actually perversely giving financial institutions, giving the card issuers more opportunities to prove their value and worth. Now, I'm not telling anybody to stop, doing the fraud prevention work that they're doing, for sure. That would never be a crazy thing to tell them. But the irony is that with these opportunities, they're actually having more opportunities to build relationships. And I think there's a cultural aspect that's missing from a lot of financial institutions. And I think it's kind of reflected positively with companies like Discover and American Express, who really understand this, that the fraud resolution process is a highly emotional, stressful experience for consumers. They don't know, why this happened, who has access to their card, what's happening with this. Is this going to go back? Am I going to be responsible for this? There's a lot of stress around this process for the consumer, which is why it's so important process to their relationship. When it is handled positively, fast, with good information, with strong communication, with strong automation, it gives a lot of confidence to the consumer that the process is going along well, and I'm going to have this resolved positively. But more importantly, it builds that confidence among the consumer that, hey, this company really knows what they're doing. And
Mm.
as I mentioned before, so many consumers have experienced multiple fraud related experiences over the past couple of years that they're expecting this to happen again, which is why it's become so important. So there's so many aspects to this from a customer relationship perspective, but also from the cost perspective. It costs a lot to the issuer to resolve this process, the time it takes for various people to do it. And as it continues to explode, um, without that automation, it's not only costing the issuer more from a cost perspective, but it's costing them from a relationship perspective. So yeah, this is why we put this together to kind of really kind of educate the financial institutions and fintechs on why handling this process is so important from a strategic perspective.
Yeah,
And,
and
and
Ron,
just, yeah.
one thing I'd love to add on to that, if I could, Charles, completely agree on the elements of the relationship. And this report does a great job of articulating the importance of making this process better on the relationship. I want to touch on something you said kind of at the beginning there as well around the prevention side. Also, vehemently, completely agree that continuing to invest in prevention is critical to everyone's strategy. But these two processes are really tied together, prevention and resolution, and having better processes on resolution, better data on resolution is extremely useful in feeding the prevention side. And we see that pretty consistently as well. As you automate more, collect more data, you're able to feed back more to the prevention side and really, improve prevention strategies as well. So both pieces go together, which I think is definitely really important.
And Ryan, I'm sure we can all agree that consumer expectations are forever rising. Um, Ryan, just tell us about the compulsory elements, therefore. I mean, you talk about automation. Is it possible for these card issuers to automate every aspect of fraud resolution? I mean, I see some of these organizations polled were taking 5 days to respond. Clearly, they're not automating things. There's some human there who's not able to handle the sheer volume of requests. What does a cutting edge organization look like in terms of automation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right. It's around the volume of requests that become very important as well. Any kind of individual case is great, but how do you scale it? How do you really respond in volume? What we see is upwards of 40% and even more in some cases of disputes being entirely automated. So we would call that kind of straight through processing, meaning the system takes care of it and goes from intake all the way through to resolution, fully automated. A person did not need to be involved. And that's, like I said, 40% or upwards of even more, depending on the organization. Every organization has different sort of tolerances and preferences. And so what's important is any process you take on should be configurable to adjust to that organization's particular needs. But even if you're in that 50-60% of disputes where someone is touching it, perhaps, you still want to automate as much of those. And that's where we see 80 to 90% of the tasks within there can still be automated. So that's what really kind of helps drive is you can automate quite a bit of the activity. And then the points that matter most to the consumer, fast resolution, better communication, those elements are much easier to do because you're not spending time on some of the more time intensive but less valuable tasks.
Great. We're coming to the end of the conversation, but Ron, I'd like to ask you about your expectations for this fraud experience index, because this report gives us the hard numbers that the industry can work from. What's your hope for this index? Is it going to be an annual thing, regular thing? Is this a one-off? Do you expect organizations to start to do more internal polling of their customers? What's your hope for the index?
Well, as long as fraud levels continue to rise or at least stay at where they're at, I think it becomes very important. I would love to see this be an annual effort. I don't think things would change that much, in a 6-month period, but year over year. And I think it enables some of the lower ranked providers to see how they're doing and whether or not somebody takes over American Express's slot at the top.
Okay, and just to finish off, Ryan, I'd like to ask you how organizations should respond to this report. Now, hopefully they're going to read it, but I hope they just don't get to the final page and go, oh, well, okay, that was interesting numbers. Back to work. What should they do after reading this report?
Yeah, I think the call to action here is it's a really good opportunity to benchmark yourselves. And there's an opportunity now, as I said, kind of at the beginning, there's an objective framework here, and an opportunity to really engage and take an honest assessment of where we're at. We've said throughout, I think most organizations are doing okay to good, but there are opportunities to go from good to great. And this framework really gives a great way to assess where you are, find the areas where, perhaps greatest improvement can take place. And then hopefully what the research also demonstrates is it has a meaningful impact. And there is a way to quantify that impact and really drive not only a better experience for your customers or members, but also just greater value for the financial institution and better returns.
That's great. Before we go, we do have a question actually from the audience, Sarah Owens. Ron, I can put this to you, and it definitely applies to the main theme of the report, which is how can banks evaluate whether improvements in fraud resolution translates into stronger customer loyalty? So people are going to read this report, try and do better, but how are they going to know whether it's going to translate into stronger customer loyalty? What does the report tell us?
I think it's a matter of simple marketing analytics with ensuring that you're looking at whether or not a particular cardholder has experienced a fraud related issue in a particular period of time, and then tracking the card utilization, as well as the broader relationship. What other products and services are they using? But I think key to this is having some level of benchmarking for this level of satisfaction with the process itself, because you need that to be able to judge whether or not the result, the behavior that comes after the fraud dispute or resolution process is having an impact on the relationship. So I think it's important for the financial institutions and fintechs to take more of a structured approach. I appreciate this opportunity to once again bash the net promoter score for being the stupidest metric we've ever come up with in the world of business. But if you're simply asking your cardholder, how likely are you to refer us, you're going to get people like me who are going to go 0, because I don't actually talk to people about my credit cards and debit cards or my airlines or my hotels or any of that other stuff. But importantly, it's the framework to understand what were the aspects of the process that were satisfactory or less than satisfactory, and then using that as input to understand, well, how did the relationship proceed over the ensuing 6 months, 12 months. So I think there's an analytics exercise that most institutions and fintechs would have to go through here.
Okay, well, guys, that wraps it up. I mean, I love to have a conversation where everything is backed up with hard numbers, and this is what the report gives the entire banking, fintech, financial industry. So I hope everyone downloads the report. It's available from quavo.com. I think we've touched on the highlights, but there's so much more detail and nuance in there for people to pore over. So from myself, Charles Alton Jones, from Ryan and from Ron and the team at FinTech Talk, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much.